Before entering the forest, Jason decided that he wouldn't go further than 30 meters from the river. Since there weren't any bushes blocking the path into the forest, Jason slipped right in. For the first 5 minutes, Jason didn't find anything to eat. He examined the trees from their roots to the top of their crown to reassure no fruits escaped his line of sight. He didn't find anything and was starting to notice an ongoing pattern. The forest seemed to be devoid of all life and had an extremely limited number of things to eat. He started to speculate that both Chubby and himself were placed in the forest to die. At this point, Jason started thinking that walking around in this foodless forest was a waste of time. 2 minutes later, he still couldn't find anything that could be eaten and was about to call it quits. As he turned around in defeat, he saw something white in the corners of his eyes. He quickly traced his eyes back in the direction he saw the white thing. When on further inspection, he saw that it was a couple of white mushrooms. They looked similar to the mushrooms he had earlier. What he didn't notice about the mushrooms was that they had dust on them and it had small red lines running on the sides of them. Without thinking, he started pumping his hands in victory. He was now a breadwinner and his search wasn't a pointless endeavor. Jason calmed down after his excitement started to fade away. He got on his knees to remove the mushrooms from the ground. He gently removed the clutter from around all the mushrooms without disturbing them. Next, he put his hand around the first mushroom and started pulling on it just as gently as he removed the clutter. When the mushroom was pulled out of the ground, it had a minimal amount of damage afflicted on it. Jason brought the unearthed mushroom close to his nose to take a whiff of it. The aroma of freshly peeled pineapples hit his nose once again. With the smell, he was able to confirm that this was the mushroom from earlier. He knew from this point on he had to be extra careful when he pulled out the mushrooms. He didn't want to damage the mushrooms at all, if possible. One after the other, Jason gently pulled out the rest of the mushrooms. Done with the task, Jason put the mushrooms in his pockets. He then stood up and proceeded to stretch weary body. He moved his body around to hear all the desirable cracks in the right places. With every crack, he knew his stretching was getting the job done. When Jason was done stretching, he started walking back to the river. This time, he wasn't lost, he knew exactly where to go. While walking, Jason had something on his mind. He was debating whether or not he should show Chubby all the mushrooms he found or tell a lie and say he found a few. Both options had their advantages and disadvantages. If he showed Chubby all the mushrooms he found, he would be a true team player, but on the other hand, he wouldn't get to eat all mushrooms he wanted. He had no doubt in his mind that he would give Chubby some, but how much? After a few minutes of deliberation, he decided on showing Chubby all the mushrooms he had. He reasoned that Chubby would do the same for him, and that was all the comforted he needed. The guilt that Jason had started to feel disappeared completely and was able to walk with a straight back. After a few minutes of walking, Jason was able to see the river in front of him. He quickened his pace with a pep in his step. He was excited to show Chubby the fruits of his labor. When Jason came out the clearing of the forest, he saw Chubby sitting peacefully in front of the river. The thought of scaring Chubby crossed his mind for a second. He knew that it would probably lighten the mood and might make both of them relax afterwards. The more he thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. That was until he saw just how peaceful and relaxed Chubby seemed. He started thinking that maybe scaring Chubby wasn't the greatest of ideas. What they needed was to find food, shelter, and maybe people to give them directions. The closer Jason got to Chubby's position, the more correct he felt his decision was. He saw Chubby sitting cross-legged on the gray stony ground with his left arm resting on his right thigh and his face resting on his right fist. The picture contrasted the upbeat feeling Chubby usually gave off. "You're back already, buddy?" "Yeah, I'm back," Jason answered back. After answering Chubby, Jason thought back to how ridiculous the thought of scarring Chubby was. He was more alert to his surrounding than he was. Did you find anything? Yeah, I found a couple of mushrooms. That's great, I thought you didn't find anything. I just got lucky. Luck or not, you did good, buddy. Thanks. I found 8 of them, so 4 for me and 4 for you. Jason took out the 8 mushrooms from his pockets to show Chubby. After showing Chubby the mushrooms, Jason split them as equally as possible. He of course took the biggest one and gave Chubby the second biggest. It was fairer that way. When Chubby took his mushrooms, he thanked Jason and smelled the sweet scent coming from them. Let's eat them at the same time, suggested Jason. Sure, buddy, Chubby answered back after he was done smelling the mushrooms. On the count of 3, we take a bite. Chubby nodded his head in confirmation. After that, both Jason and Chubby positioned their smallest mushroom by their mouths. On my count. 1, 2, 2.5, 3. Chubby almost ate his mushroom when Jason said 2.5, but he stopped himself at the last second. When Jason said 3, both of them took as big of a bit as possible. On their first bite, they didn't taste anything, so they kept on chewing. On the second bite, the taste started to appear. On the third bite, the taste punched them in the face. The mushroom tasted similar to freshly puked vomit. They both took an involuntary fourth bite and their faces scrunched up. Their faces resembled someone who ate an extremely sour candy and couldn't handle it. The taste was so nasty, they opened their mouths and spat out the mushrooms. The taste didn't immediately go away with the mushrooms out their mouths. In a sense, it actually became stronger and more disgusting. They started scraping their tongues to get the foul taste out. It wasn't working and made it worse. Their fingers had the residue from the other mushrooms they had in their hands. By them scraping their tongues, the residue had spread all over it. The taste was making them gag. That was when they remembered the river in front of them. They turned around to face each other before they bolted to drink some water. They started drinking the river water by the mouthful. After they drank water till they couldn't drink any more, they stopped. As soon as they stopped drinking the river water, they noticed the disgusting taste in their mouths was starting to recede. That was one of the most disgusting things I ever ate, buddy. Where did you find those mushrooms from? I found it by the roots of a tree, plus they looked and smelled like the mushrooms you found earlier. Yeah, I know, but why did they taste so bad? I don't know. Gosh, it tasted so bad. Jason and Chubby continued to trash talk about how nasty the mushrooms were. They couldn't figure why the mushrooms were so nasty. The mushrooms looked similar to the mushrooms they had from last night, and the aroma they gave off was the same. So why were they so different? That was when the scenes from last night and the scenes from earlier overlapped in Jason's head. He remembered the details from each mushroom and started comparing them. The first batch of mushrooms were spotless without any marks on it. If Jason could remember correctly, the second batch of mushrooms weren't spotless and possibly had a mark. Wait, did they? Jason thought. Jason scrambled over to the mushrooms on the ground to see if his theory was right. He picked up a mushroom and brought it close to his eyes. The first thing that he noticed was that the mushrooms weren't spotless, they had dust all over them. On closer inspection, he started to see the faint red lines running down the side of the mushroom. They weren't the same mushrooms from last night, said out loud to both himself and Chubby. While fully understanding he made an unexpected blunder by not identifying the right mushrooms. 30 seconds had passed since both him and Chubby took their first bite of the vomit-tasting mushroom. That was when Jason looked over at Chubby to find himself seeing things. He saw Chubby's clothes started turning different colors and length. After a while, Chubby's outfit set on a red and black long-sleeve striped shirt with a midnight-colored black pants. While he was looking at Chubby's right hand, he saw it forming a black glove-like covering on top of it. After the glove-like covering formed, his fingernails started to elongate and at the same time turned to metal. When Chubby's metal nails stopped growing, they resembled extremely sharp knives. The worst thing happened when he looked at Chubby's face. His face resembled a person who had just healed from extreme third-degree burns. Jason couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. He blinked his eyes just in case he was seeing things. After blinking his eyes, Jason looked at Chubby again. He found Chubby's entire appearance was back to normal, without anything out of place. Jason was relieved, thinking that his mind was only playing tricks on him. As he relaxed, he involuntarily blinked. After blinking, he accidentally looked over at Chubby. He saw the abomination was back. Jason was staring to freak out. He didn't understand what was going on. Every time he blinked, either Chubby or the abomination would show up. The 8th time Jason blinked, the figure was staring to get close to him. The 10th time he blinked, the figure became a little closer. On the 12th blink, the figure was still coming closer. After 12th time blinking, Jason knew if he kept blink, the figure would come closer to him. He tried to stop himself from doing so. He was able to control his eyelids for 30 seconds before he blinked, and every time after that, the time he was able to keep from blinking was getting shorter and shorter. After Jason blinked the 40th, the figure was close to his face. Jason was scared out his mind. "It's Chubby," said the figure in a creepy husky voice after Jason blinked the 42nd time. Jason was so scared he felt his heart skip a beat, and he almost peed on himself. On the other side of Jason, Chubby was going through a hard time too. When 30 seconds had passed since he took his first bite into the nasty mushroom, he started seeing things. When he looked at the river, the water started turning blood red. Chubby could swear he smelled the stench of blood coming from the river. The smell made his stomach hurt. When Chubby looked away from the river and looked over at Jason, he was starting to get scared. Jason's face was becoming a blob of swollen flesh. When his face couldn't possibly become any more swollen, a yellowing mask started to form on his face. Chubby watched the mask start forming from the left side of Jason's face to the right side of Jason's face. The only thing the yellowing mask didn't cover was Jason's 2 eyes. Suddenly Chubby saw Jason's eyes open and stare right at him. Chubby felt like Jason was staring at his soul. The transformation didn't stop on Jason's face. His clothes turned pitch black with tearings forming all over them. The last thing Chubby saw happening to Jason was what was forming in his hand. A black metal started growing from a couple inches to a 3-foot-long machete. When the machete was done forming, it was being pointed in Chubby's direction. When Chubby seen it happen, he wanted to run, but he couldn't get off the ground. Jason's figure slowly stood up and started walking towards him. Chubby was so frightened his mind went blank for a second. He snapped out of his daze to find Jason's figure coming closer and closer. He wasn't able to do anything other than watch. From then on, every step Chubby saw Jason take, he felt his heart skipping a beat. When Chubby saw Jason take the last step that brought him 1 foot away from him, he thought his heart had stopped. Then Jason positioned the sharp-looking machete by Chubby's neck. The eyes that was staring at Chubby opened wider and stared exactly into Chubby's eyes. Chubby started to hyperventilate. There was no doubt in his mind that he was about to die. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.